I'm wearing what is called a jack or brigandine. This was a garment which was worn as an alternative to plate armour or to chain mail. It has the great advantage of being light, it's flexible, and it still affords the wearer a fair degree of protection against a sword thrust or a lance thrust, and obviously much less to an arrow or a bullet. Some of these garments had metal or horn plates which are actually sewn into the lining, between the lining and the outer face, which provided an extra layer of protection. One of the great advantages of the jack was that it was a lot cheaper to make, a lot cheaper to manufacture than a metal protection. It normally had wooden or leather buttons, such as this example has, with very heavy duty stitching down the seams and along the lining. The high neck is there not just as a fashion statement, but it's there to protect the wearer against sword thrust or cut to the back of to the side or back of the neck and protect the throat. This particular example is based on a copy in the National Museum of Scotland and dates from about 1575 to 1585. But this form of leather protection in one shape or form persisted right throughout the whole of the medieval period and well into the Civil War time. Cost of one of these, very hard to say because they were actually made locally, made by the family or made by the wearer himself. So the cost really would be no more than the amount of leather which was used, which would quite likely come from the herds or beasts of the wearer himself. So the cost was virtually negligible. Plate armour of the time was extremely expensive. A full plate armour, although plate armours were no longer worn by for battle in the late 16th century, they were still worn for the tourney. And in comparative terms, a full plate armour for a man would cost, perhaps in modern terms, 20 or 30,000 pounds, the cost, say, of an expensive motor car, whereas one of these jacks can be manufactured for a matter of shillings. I'm representing an English gentleman farmer from the northern counties of England, Northumberland of course, in the late 16th century. I go under the name of Heron. Heron was a well-known border name. They were from time to time wardens of the Middlemarch and also notorious reivers in their own right. I'm wearing the type of costume which such a gentleman might have worn if he was preparing to go out and steal cattle from his Scottish neighbours at about that time. By way of bodily protection, I'm wearing what is called a jack or brigandine, this leather protective garment. Underneath that, I have a linen shirt which has wooden buttons, as you'll see, and which is locally made. I have a stout leather belt which supports a leather pouch which will contain some basic foodstuffs, a few coins, things of that nature. If I had a firearm, I would also keep my shot in this pouch. By way of what we now call trousers, I am wearing what were called hose at that time, which are fairly close-fitting woolen breeches, with what ought to be covered is covered by what's called a codpiece, which is a separate flap of material held in place by leather thongs. On my legs and feet, I'm wearing what are called horseman's boots, which are simply stout leather boots, not unlike those worn by modern motorcyclists, but they extend halfway up the thigh. This served two purposes. It enabled me to ride all night without the stirrup chafing, the stirrup leather chafing on my inner thighs, and it also provided a level of protection against sword cut. The leather of the boot, like the leather of the jack, would to a certain extent resist a slash from an enemy's sword or axe.